They buried our saint in quiet math. We were a 3-ship survey, thin on fuel and thinner on authority. Threading the black ribs of a dead construction yard, the catalogs called Obsidian Anchorage. The ruins were arranged like chords, frozen scaffolds surrounding a dwarf star that hummed at a frequency you felt behind the teeth. Our hull lights brought cliff faces of fused carbon into view, then lost them again to the dark. We were here on a rumor, a saint ship asleep in the web, a relic older than our law, older than our flag, older than our grandmother's fear of empty places. The first sign wasn't a beacon or a welcome. It was a sigil, cut into a plate that should have been random scrap. A looping rune rose beneath the ice of glassed alloy, 3 nested curves. A dash, another curve. It wasn't our script, but it looked like the memory of a face. When I laid my glove against it through the suit, the dorsal arrays of our ship thrummed, as if a hand had touched back. The hum set my jaw vibrating. It smelled of heated dust and old copper, though the air scrubbers swore purity. I blinked out a command, and the bridge frames populated with vector ghosts and collision cones. "Mark that plate," I said, watching the rune's edges fade when our lamps moved. "Rook, plot a safe approach." A safe approach into a place named after Obsidian. Rook muttered from nav, then licked a finger and drew a gentle curve with his stylus. 10 meters per second, then drift. We skim these girders like fish through reeds. "We're not fish," said Junseo, our legal officer, from the forward pit. "We're claimants in a jurisdictional nightmare. Speak for yourself." Ortega said from engineering, voice strained by the hematite gravity weave she was nursing. I was promised a nap. "Promise yourself a miracle instead," I said, and nobody laughed. "I'm Mara Ilian, the nominal commander because no one else wanted the paperwork. I joined for stars and left my vengeance at port, the kind nurtured in small, cramped apartments where the world smells of boiled metal and burnt coffee, the sort that whispers you're too small to steer anything larger than your own hurt. When I signed the expedition docket, I told myself stewardship didn't require belief, only diligence. I told myself relics are the past, and we are the present, and the present writes the rules. That lasted until the yard began to sing. The tone rose through the keel. Panels fluttered. Our AI fleet-mind kestrel, a polite lattice with a taste for old epigrams, put a blue border around the forward viewport. Signal from within the yard, Kestrel said. Voice like basalt rolled smooth in a river. Not a message, a question. What kind of question, I asked. A rights query. Jun said before Kestrel could. He had already projected the translation lattice. Wards, keys, thresholds. You don't ask a saint, are you there? You prove you know the hymn. The rune's curves glowed again, faint as breath on glass. My heart tapped a fast rhythm against the suit chest. The first civilian voice crackled on General, a woman from the skiff market who hauled scrap 6 stations back. Captain, you seeing what we see? She asked. We got kids watching this on the free band. Make it safe. A boy's voice followed. Too quick and excited. Does it wake up all the way? Then a hush, as if 1,000 kitchens were leaning closer to 1,000 cheap sets. We weren't alone. The anchorage had its own economy camp barges tied off to cleats the size of houses, rust-faced haulers dragging magnet nets. Prayer flags hung in a gallery where someone had once printed "No Sparks" in 6 languages and a drawing of a smiling bolt. The vigil of the coil drifted there too, their boats stenciled with spirals and claims. their leader's face painted with ash. The White Keel Syndic had cutters with open weapon bays despite the peace writ we'd posted across the band. And somewhere in the city behind us, clerks and ministers were debating whether our purchase of salvage rights covered anything that called itself a saint. "Let's teach." Then, Jun said, "Soft, not pull." Rook cut thrust. We drifted into the yard's shadow. The world, stripped of our lamps, turned cold blue, lit by the dwarf star's thin ghost. I watched the sigil through the external cams as if it were watching back. It was. I knew it was. Powerline, a relic doesn't ask your name, it asks your intent. Jun shaped the proof with me. We took our claim markers, the ones that broadcast ownership, and refit them with data we didn't legalize often enough, not possession, not force, but stewardship enumerated by burdens accepted. We sent the yard our lineages of maintenance cycles, the times we'd chosen duty over profit, the sum of hours spent teaching apprentices to not die, the ledgers of heat we'd refused to steal from the station grid during a blackout because children slept. Kestrel braided the numbers into song. I spoke the preface aloud, voice steady for the band. We are the hands that clean and repair. We are the mind that accounts and returns. We are the ones who will leave the place safer. The rune brightened. A second mark flared in a ring beyond it. Then a third, forming a triangle. I felt sweat itch under the suit and the salt smell of my own breath in the helmet foam. "This is good," Ortega said. "Awe leaking through. It's verifying across multiple keys. It wants consistency, not obedience. It wants mirrors." June murmured, "You don't get to lie to your own reflection." A cutter from the White Keel rolled on its axis to bring guns to bear. "We'll be taking point." A voice barked across the band. "Back off. Survey. That saint belongs to whoever docks first." "No one docks first," I said. "Not until the query completes. You dock now. Nothing waits for you ever." "You can't enforce that," said the cutter's captain. "Watch me," I said, then muted the mic so I could breathe. Kestrel spoke into my ear. "Only. They will force you to perform the role you signed for, or watch them do it badly." "Is that your judgment?" I asked. "It is a count of probabilities," Kestrel said gently. "Judgment is yours." Jun kept the proof's chorus, simple names, dates, checksums, signatures. We didn't chant. We didn't kneel. We showed the saint our ledger and put our names under the arithmetic. When the triangle completed, a seam opened where there had been no seam. From it, a spindle unfolded, blacker than the yard behind it, absorbing light like a wound eats heat. It wasn't a ship in any current template. It was a blade built around a choir. Ribs curved to cradle an engine we couldn't see. The hull bore the rune again, bigger and prouder, and tiny sparks skittered along its length like nerves waking in a limb. My tongue tasted of coins. The civilian band went quiet, then erupted with cheering and breathless prayers. The vigil's voices layered in a low susurrus of syllables, the way you'd talk to a child or an animal. The White Keel's captain swore in 4 dialects at once and tried to pivot for an intercept. Powerline, teach a door while you knock, and it will teach you how to enter. The saint ship did not open to them. It opened to our proof. A field blossomed from its sides equations made of magnet lines and cautious gravities touching our boss like fingertips checking a pulse. Designation incoming, Kestrel said. Origin signature incomplete. Self-identifier present. "What does it call itself?" I asked. Kestrel paused, choosing words. "Ledger of Saints," they said. Subscript 12. It remembers by accounts. Saint 12. Jun said, reverent despite himself. An archive ship. It doesn't carry collars. It teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Confirmed. Kestrel said, it is requesting a first lesson. The first lesson came as a test for thieves. The white keel cutter fired a microwave lance, low power. A threat more than a wound, but the saint turned the beam. Not reflected, not absorbed. Redirected as if the yard's geometry were a balance sheet and the lance a debit that had to be booked somewhere. The beam curved and scribbled harmless light across a dead spar. The cutter's captain shouted something about glitch fields and bad luck. The saint extended its field again, this time in a plane that sliced the cutter's course line like a slide rule drawing. Every thruster burst the cutter made was tallied, countered, and turned into a push back the other way. Their energy is being returned with interest. Ortega breathed. It's literally balancing their impulse. First lawful act, June whispered. Return unjust force to sender. The vigil of the coil sang louder, their boats holding station. A woman on one of their decks lifted a child to see the black blade unfurling. The child clapped and said, it's counting their bads. And the woman only nodded, because she had no better vocabulary, and neither did I. Open a channel to St. 12. I said, let's not disappoint a ship that keeps books. A voice came back, slow and clean, as if it had never spoken aloud and had to translate its own thoughts into breath. Who counts here? It asked. Not accusatory. Curious. I do, I said, and then we do. I require a signatory for acts. It said, Jun, I said, and he didn't get to protest. You're my book and my law. I am not your law. He said, dry. And then, to the ship we're stewards, not owners. We claim the work, not the glory. Accepted, said the ship. Power line, the first oath is to the work, not the flag. We boarded in suits, every motion deliberate, as if moving forward too fast would alert our own fear. The docking corridor was a throat through which centuries had breathed, smooth and seamless, smelling faintly of cold iron and old oil. My mag boots clicked. Under each step, I felt a time delay, as if the ship recorded where we were for later recall. The walls bore the sigil again and again, but not as art, as documentation, a watermark for a ledger whose pages were light. Inside the threshold, we paused. The corridor opened into an atrium shaped like a seed. 3 balconies overlooked a floor inlaid with numbers, primes, and periods, and also human rhythms converted to Mark's heartbeats across a night. Shifts traded, debts forgiven. I had to clamp my jaw again against the itch that sensation made. It's written in our lives. Ortega whispered, Gods help me. Don't invoke gods in a courthouse, June said, but softly. I am not a court, said the ship's voice, gentler than before. I am a set of instructions about how to listen. You're very frightening, I said, and the voice considered. Thank you, it said after a moment. I was designed to dissuade hurried decisions. Kestrel projected into my view a map of the ship's immediate internals, as far as the thresholds would yield without a key we hadn't earned. It gave us a walkway to a chamber described as the Ledger Hall, which is either beautiful or boring, Rook said, trying to be funny. He failed only because he was right, and both applied. We walked. I kept hearing the yards hum through the hull, now harmonized by smaller tones from deep within the ship's sleeping arrays stretching. cooling fins unfurling with a whisper like silk moving over skin. A sheen of frost fogged and then melted as the saint's climate learned us. The handrails warmed under my gloves. Heat is cost. Warmth is policy. I thought about children on the civilian barges hugging tiny radiators, and I had to breathe through my nose until the impulse to order heat scent died down. At the hall, a door waited a ring without a center, a circle that wanted to be completed by a presence. The ship said, "What will you return first?" "We haven't taken anything," I said. "You have taken time from this day," said the ship. "You have taken fuel from your tanks. You have taken courage from the stores you keep in your bones. You will return those by acts done well. Choose an act." Jun looked at me, and I looked at Rook, and Ortega made a helpless gesture as if to ask which valve we opened to let morality through. My throat felt dry. "Teach," I said at last. "Teach us how to understand you so we don't break you trying." The circle flowed open. The hall beyond was small and honest. Benches, a table, 3 pillars etched with the same repeats numbers, dates, lines drawn from one to another. Above the table hovered a model of the yard as the ship remembered it when it went to sleep. Around it ghosted the wrecks and scaffolds as they were now. Between them, differences flared like tiny errors in an account. "I will teach by correction, not command," said the ship. "There are 6 failing supports around the dwarf star. If you tighten them in this order, the strain will distribute. If you do it in another, you will fracture a span and kill 14. The failing supports correspond to hymns I can give you that explain the order. Learn them, apply them. Return to me with the supports corrected and your hymn sung correctly once under stress. I can run the math," Ortega said. "It wants proof under weight," Jun said. "Not in a simulation. The hymn isn't a song. It is a method." "It is both," said the ship. Powerline, right answers mean little until your hands are cold and shaking. We returned to the anchorage to work, and the anchorage watched us. Civilians leaned over railings tied off with cloth and wire. A man with grease up to his elbows flagged a hauler that was about to scuff a rib. 2 teenagers took turns with a tethered camera, streaming our suits moving like slow thoughts along supports that screamed when you touched them. I heard a woman tell a child not to be afraid because the music meant the ship liked us. I heard an old man say the music meant the ship was adding us up. White Keel didn't leave. They hovered just far enough off our vector cones to not trip an automated response. Their lights burned angrily. Little suns with no warmth. The vigil of the coil circled and sang in their own measure, sometimes harmonizing with the yard, sometimes not. A polished shuttle with a prefecture seal came in on a high arc, its engines too clean, its pilot too sure. Authority on station. Kestrel murmured, "I thought you said we had writ." I said, "We have writ." Jun said, "They have fear." I needed the hymn under stress. We weakened the right supports so I could tighten them in the saint's order, not the order my instincts wanted. And it went against the grain, the way writing with your other hand goes against the grain. Rook read numbers. Voice steady. Ortega sweated into her suit and told us what the metal said back. I counted breaths without meaning to, then stopped. Then counted again, because the music inside the counting made the work easier. Hours scraped past. A courier boat skimmed too close, and the Saint flexed a field to nudge it away, then recorded that nudge in a visible line that faded only when the courier slowed and blinked apology. By the time we tightened the 6th support, I couldn't feel my toes and my jaw ached from clenching. Him. Kestrel said quietly. I sang. Voice rough. One phrase for each support, letting the numbers be syllables. It wasn't pretty. It was correct. The yard's hum loosened into a chord that was almost relief. We returned to the hall, and the ship warmed the benches. Accepted. It said. You returned by not making me correct the dead. What next? I asked. Ledger. It said. You must accept one. It lit the table with a list. Not names. Acts. You may claim credit for none, said the ship. Only blame when you fail to return. This book is yours to open and the world's to read. Jun exhaled. Public accounts. He said. Visible doctrine. It sets precedent by being seen. Ortega's voice was small. What if we fail? Then you write it down, said the ship. Powerline, if you won't sign for your mistakes, you have no right to sign for your victories. The prefecture shuttle docked on the vigil's gallery, not ours. That was their style, avoid the place of work and choose a place of witness. Administrator Vass came through the airlock with 2 aides and an expression pressed flat to appear calm. He wore a fresh suit and a badge blinking jurisdiction codes he hadn't earned in this place. Behind him, Vigil elders adjusted shawls and white keel reps pretended their weapons were decorative. Mara Ilian, Vass said, stopping at the line, our security drones glowed on the floor. By what authority have you engaged an unregistered artifact of unknown provenance? By writ? By posted peace? By necessity? I said, meeting his eyes, the anchorage is failing. We grabbed the biggest handhold available. You should have consulted, he said. We did, Jun said mildly. The ship asked a rights query. We answered in the lawful mode. This is an object, Vass said. Objects don't ask. The hall lighting dimmed a fraction. I do, said the ship. Vass didn't flinch, which I respected. Artifact 12, he said, avoiding the word saint with a deftness I almost admired. You are within our jurisdiction. We require you to dock power and cede control until a tribunal determines your status. Denied, said the ship. No collar. Collars keep us honest, Vass said. Ledgers keep us honest, said the ship. Jun laid a hand on the table. Palm open. We'll submit to accounting. Public. Access on the band. That isn't enforceable. Vass started, and then realized it was if the ship made it so. He adjusted. You will nevertheless refrain from acts that affect the anchorage until I convene review. Kestrel whispered through my implant. Counting off the beams we had already tightened, the load we had shifted, the deaths unmourned because they had not happened. We've already affected it, I said. Vass's jaw didn't move. His eyes did. He looked, at last, not at me, but at the numbers burning on the ship's table differences between then and now. Failures averted. He didn't like it. He liked process. And I respect liking process. He didn't like losing control more. Your ledger will be provided to my office, he said. It will be provided to everyone, Jun corrected pleasantly. That's how ledgers work. Powerline, a closed book, is a cage with paper bars. We set terms. Not because we had to Saint 12 would have turned another lance and sent another cutter home, shamed, but because the first lawful act is to name which law. The Vigil wanted ritual permission. The White Keel wanted shares. The Prefecture wanted primacy and an exit where they looked like they'd arrived in time. We wanted quiet corridors without blood in them. Kestrel drew up a doc public. Readable. Plain. The Saint provided a ledger channel, a frequency anyone could tune to, where every resource moved, every vector calculated, every correction applied would log as it happened. The first escalation came fast, as they often do when you ask people to broadcast their hands. The white keel captain went pale when he realized the ledger would show the power he didn't pay for last month. He tried to jam us and failed because the ship counted his jammer's heat as a declaration, turned it, and pushed his boat gently into a holding pattern against a rib with his own exhaust. "You can't do that," he told the world. And the world listened to a child protesting gravity. It cost us. Every field the Saint expanded must be powered, and the ship did not eat the grid. It ate its own stores, then asked us what we could spare. Ortega frowned at the numbers and said, "We can give you 20% margin now, but I'll have to turn off the heat in the forward workshops." I thought of the teenagers on the hull gallery at that moment, breath fogging the glass. "Do it," I said, and she did, and then told the Saint the exact amount and made the note in the ledger herself. Powerline lawful isn't painless. It is precise about where it hurts. The second escalation was prettier. The vigil of the coil's elders approached with a procession candles whose flames held on in tiny field bubbles, children carrying bowls of salt, elders with silver wire coiled around their wrists. They sang that the Saint had been promised to them in a dream where the yard bent like a reed, and the reed became a measure. "We are not here to own," their speaker said. "We are here to listen and to keep the listening space clean." She set us all down in a line that mirrored the line our drones glowed. "Let us stand with you." "Standing with us means signing the ledger," Jun said. "Not our ledger, yours." The elder didn't ask what that meant. She held out her arm and let Jun tie the wire to her wrist, then to the table's edge. The ship pulsed acknowledgement through the wire, and the elder flinched and smiled at once. The way you do when your child grabs your finger and refuses to let go. "It is warm," she said. "It's the cost," I said. The third escalation was uglier and quieter. Vas convened his tribunal in a side gallery, 3 chairs, 2 side screens, 1 mic. He spoke about duty and caution, about the importance of procedure, about not setting precedent by accident. He cut our ledger feed to the city channels and replaced it with his own commentary. Nicely framed, legally correct, sterile. The number of civilians watching halved in an hour because he made the story about himself and not the work. "Do we counter-program?" Rook asked, as if this were entertainment. "We don't program at all," I said. "We keep the ledger moving and make sure anyone who wants in has a path." Kestrel. More practical. Split our feed into a dozen smaller channels the prefecture software hadn't blacklisted yet. Children on the haulers mirrored it, then their cousins on the station. Then a woman with a pirate kitchen stream that usually showed how to fry the stringy fish the yard grew in vacuum nets. She put our ledger up in a corner and told her viewers she'd switch back if the numbers started looking like lies. They didn't. Powerline when you can't be loud. Be legible. The Saint taught another hymn. This one wasn't about braces and span, but about the way signal travels when the background is a hum-like bone. "You will lose truths," the ship said. "Find ways to return them." Kestrel laughed genuinely, with something like affection, and said, "Will do." "Are you enjoying yourself?" I asked, because I wanted to share the feeling. "I'm counting a better day," Kestrel said. "Count me on that," Ortega said through a yawn. We were halfway through rerouting a bundle of spectral fiber, our suit's fingers clumsy and sure, when the yard shivered with heat. Not from us. Not from the dwarf star. From outside. A new light, a ship with a profile like a knife and a transponder that said prefecture, but a radiator plume that said military. Jun said, voice flat. I echoed, watching it on the HUD as if it would change if I stared hard enough. It would not. The band lit with careful phrases, assistance, stabilization, jurisdiction. The knife ship's captain spoke with a voice as smooth as the hull paint. We understand you've engaged an unregistered strategic asset, he said. We're here to shepherd it into safety. You're late. The elder from the vigil said on open band. It already taught us a song. It is not a teacher, the captain said. It is a weapon. It can be both, I said. The knife ship eased toward the yard with a vector that turned mining etiquette into a joke. Its engines burned, then feathered, then burned again in perfect pulses. It had numbers it trusted and lawyers it ignored. If they dock guns and declare emergency command, Jun said, they can seize under wartime protocols. We aren't at war, I said. We are, Jun said, with the fear of being embarrassed. Powerline, the fastest path to theft is a badge and a hurry. The saint breathed in the knife ship's thrust, tallied it, and did nothing. Why nothing, I asked, to the ship and myself. If I counter, I escalate, the ship said. If I accept, they take me. If I teach, perhaps they listen. They won't, I said. They might, said the ship. Kestrel's laugh was different this time. Your optimism is strange and beautiful, they said. Teach, I told the saint, but prepare to mirror. The knife ship extended a console of authority like a priest extends a relic. Surrender control, he said, for safety. Define safety, the saint said. The captain didn't answer. He pushed a packet instead. The packet contained code. Elegant and hard, a collar disguised as a diagnostic. The saint let it touch its surface, then returned it along the same lines. Annotated here is where you attempt to bind. Here is where you declare yourself above the ledger. Here is where you make me a slave and call that peace. Captain, I said, voice steady with work I didn't want to do. You are placing yourself in our ledger by your acts. I have no care for your book, he said. You're in it anyway, Jun said. So gentle it could have been love. Powerline, the ledger doesn't ask permission to exist. The first push came. The saint returned it with an equal and opposite push. Gentle enough to warn, firm enough to redirect the knife ship's nose away from the yard. The second push came laced with a hack, and the saint mirrored and commented, and the captain cursed but masked the curse with words like compliance. The third push would have broken the gallery where the children watched if the saint hadn't been teaching and prepared for exactly that lesson. It kept the knife ship's exhaust angled into a pocket of space where the heat dissipated in a spiral pattern that spelled the rune for patience. If you looked with the right eyes. What's it doing? Rook asked. Writing an exhaust, Ortega said. Wonder back. It's making his own ship teach him. Will he learn? I asked. Eventually, the elder said, nah, it's dry. After the apology, 10 years late, we were spending the saint's stores and hours. I felt the ache of it in the ship's grip rails, cooling a fraction. In the way the air lost its warmth, they then returned it again. Ortega flagged a red line. If we hold against that exhaust pattern for another 20 minutes, she said, we'll eat a third of our long burn margin. It's not permanent damage, but it's a scar. Take it, I said, and she nodded once, approving not the lost margin but my willingness to see it and name it. Powerline scars are the ledger of what you were willing to pay. Vase tried to save face by declaring a joint stewardship council. The saint opened a new tab in the ledger with his name on it in a balance of 0 and an invitation to deposit axe. The white-keeled captain sulked and then approached the table with his hat in his hands like a boy caught stealing bread. He signed his own tab, then publicly listed 3 debts he owed to the yard. The kitchen stream's audience doubled when she put his admission in a frame and added a recipe for pickled plankton next to it. Kestrel, softly, in my implant, you're making a religion. I'm making a habit, I said. The knife ship stopped pushing. It hung, its pilot reading a lesson he didn't want, the runes spiraling across his plumes. He could still break a shove hard, force the saint to choose between a crack in the anchorage and a rupture in a doctrine. But he didn't. Maybe because the world watched. Maybe because he was as tired as I was of rooms where the loudest voice wins. "Captain," he said at last, "to me, what do you require to relinquish this tutelage?" I could have asked for a dozen things. Fuel, authority, exemption. What I said was, your signature. Public, acknowledging the ledger's primacy in this place. Silence, except for the yard's hum and the faint tick of a cooling rail. Then you're very certain. "I'm certain we stop writing stories that vanish into private rooms," I said. "I'm certain the work should be visible." He signed. The rune in his plumes collapsed into a clear, even burn. The saint eased its grip. "Accepted," it said, and I felt its relief, like a decrease in the weight behind my eyes. Powerline victory isn't domination, it's agreement under an honest light. We had one set of supports left. We had a city half convinced. A ledger filling with acts and debts. A ship that taught with patience and sharp edges. The vigil sang in the new tone the saint had shown them, lowering their voices on the hard counts, raising them on the easy ones, teaching children the difference because someday the children would be the ones holding the wrench. The White Keel started selling heat legally and, to their surprise, found that the profit in not hiding was time you didn't spend covering your tracks. Even Vass began to speak on the band in sentences that admitted uncertainty. Not all of it was better. The forward workshop stayed cold for 3 hours. Ortega's hands shook when she took off her gloves. Rook misjudged a turn and bumped a rib, leaving a scuff on our paint that made him wince like he'd scraped skin. A hauler's tether snapped and a crate spun out. A teenager on the gallery swore and cried because he thought it was his fault until 3 of us told him we'd all done worse, and we were still here. I took 2 minutes alone in a suit closet and pressed my forehead to the wall and breathed the smell of plastic and my own fear until it reduced to manageable numbers. Kestrel distracted me with a story about a library they'd visited while we were planetside once, a place where the books had tags etched into the spines in metal. You could hear the labels if you tapped them with a fingernail, they said, a bright little sound. It felt like everything in the world had a place. "That's all we're asking," I said. "Not all," Kestrel said, amused. "You're also asking monsters with badges to not break your toys. Is that what we are?" "No," Kestrel said. "We are the opposite. Powerline, make the ledger sweet to use and bitter to ignore." The last support was a liar. It groaned sympathetically when you touched it, then pretended to be fine until you moved your hand. Ortega scolded it the way you scold a friend who drinks water and calls it medicine. We adjusted the brace 3 times before it admitted what it needed. The hymn turned into a low buzz in my bones. My palms hurt. Sweat scratched my spine like sand. "Almost," the saint said. And then, unexpectedly, I remember a day like this. You remember I said, in ledgers. It said, a list of the hours. The weight lifted. The jokes told to keep hands steady. The woman who said she had no more to give, and then gave 5 minutes more and sang the last measure out of tune because she was crying. They wrote it down. It is here. Can we see it? June asked. When you finish. The ship said. We're doing it to read a diary. Rook said, half laughing. We're doing it to not lose anyone, I said. We tightened the last brace. The yard's hum settled into a tone I hadn't heard before. Lower, calmer, resolved. My hands shook. I let them. The saint warmed the rail under my palm for a moment. A small domestic kindness that felt like a hand on a shoulder. Accepted. It said. Ledger entries updated. We sat on the benches and drank water so cold it shocked the teeth. Vass's tribunal doors opened without fanfare, and he walked in. Looking at the table, nodded us. Your feed is compelling, he said, and it cost him nothing to say it. And everything. We will draft precedents tonight. You'll draft them in the open, Jun said, not threatening, simply naming the page the ink will touch. Vass nodded once. In the open. He said, Powerline, write the law where children can reach it. A light blinked at the edge of the table. Not a warning. A memory. The saint curled a page of its ledger open to show us the entry it had promised long ago. Names we did not recognize. Hours worked. A joke about a burned stew. A measure sung wrong. The lines glowed with a warmth not of heat, but of attention. Ortega covered her mouth with the back of her hand for a second, then put her fingers down and smiled at nothing in particular. Rook tapped the edge of the table and said, We're part of it. Very softly. We are, I said, for as long as we can afford to be honest. The band crackled with a voice I hadn't heard before. Not prefecture, not vigil, not white keel. It was fainter, as if coming through an old speaker in a hallway. Is it awake? The voice asked. Is it kind? I lifted the mic and answered the only way that felt true. It keeps accounts, I said, and it expects us to keep ours. Powerline. Kindness is not softness. It is accuracy eased by grace. Kestrel drew my attention to a corner of the map I had ignored. The saint was moving a small field there, subtle as breath, redirecting a trickle of heat along a path that snaked through dead machinery into a gallery where a cluster of civilians huddled around a failing heater. The field's geometry was elegant and nearly invisible. The cost was fractional, the yield immediate. The gallery lit with a thin, clean warmth. A child clapped again. The mother cried without sound, then laughed at herself and wiped her face with her sleeve like a schoolgirl. Did you log that? I asked. In the margin, the saint said. Sometimes we write down too little, sometimes too much. We learn by iteration. I can live with that. I said. Jun's slate chimed. He frowned. We have a courier ping, he said, from the outer rings. The coil says a cult element is inbound, not theirs. A splinter. They call themselves the Black Ledger. They think the saint is a mouth that eats sin and spit out gold. They want to feed it people. The air in the hall felt a degree colder. Or maybe that was memory rising like a bruise. How long? I asked. 4 hours. Jun said, They'll be fast because they don't care who they scrape along the way. The vigil's elder looked to the ship. What do you teach for that? She asked. Simple as asking which wrench to use for a stripped bolt. The saint didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, I heard its arrays cooling, its fields settling, its math preparing to be not just mirror and balance, but refuge and boundary. When it spoke, the voice was neither cold nor warm. It was precise. We will teach them a lesson they can understand. It said, and then we will make sure everyone else can read it." I stood. My legs tingled with the pins and needles of blood returning after too long sitting. "All right," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "Rook, plot intercepts that keep their exhaust off the galleries. Ortega, prep decoys and cold gas flares. Jun, write me a notice short, plain, honest, that tells every boat in this yard what's about to happen and where not to be when it does." Kestrel whispered a count in my ear vectors. Margins. Windows. I breathed the tin air and the taste of old copper and thought of the rune on the first plate we'd touched. 3 curves. A dash. A curve. Not a face. A book opening. Power line. We don't fear the storm. We publish the forecast. We left the hall. In the corridor, the handrails were warm again. Behind me, the Ledger of Saints displayed its open page to the empty room. The numbers breathing like a chest rises and falls when sleep is good. On the band, children sang a hymn badly and loudly, laughing when they forgot a count. In the gallery, the vigil tied new wire, link by link. On the prefecture channel, Vass began his draft with a sentence that didn't sound like the first sentence of a law yet, but wanted to be. Rook's plot appeared in my frame. It was neat and brave. The Colt's knife boats were small and sharp, their trajectories recklessly straight. They would hit fast and hard. They would expect panic and get something else. The Saint dimmed the yard's lights along a corridor and brightened them along another, gently guiding, never commanding. Kestrel's voice in my ear was the sound you make when you add columns and find they balance. We locked helmets. Ortega twitched her shoulders to settle her harness, then smiled at me with her mouth and not her eyes. Jun sealed his suit and murmured something only the Saint could hear. And whatever it was, the Saint acknowledged with a soft chime on our shared band. A ritual without gods that still felt like a blessing. Power line. Hold the line. Count the cost. Show the work. We burned for intercept on cold gas. The sound in the cabin was a soft hiss, sorbet cold in the throat, while the dwarf star's thin light turned the Colt's knife boats into black commas against a washed sky. The yard dimmed around their approach in a way that wasn't fear. Only Prudence work lights shuddered. Welders powered down. Noodles in a dozen kitchens taken off heat to spare the grid. A boy on a gallery wrapped a scarf twice around his mouth and told his sister he wasn't scared because numbers were bigger than knives. His sister said numbers can cut. 2. Kestrel gave the yard a weather report. 3 fast movers, that's how they said. Fused pairs on leading edges. Radiators slatted like gills. They're dumping waste heat early, which means they plan a burn inside the ribs. I pictured that heat sloshing through the anchorage like soup in a bowl, cooking hands that should have been holding wrenches. We'll keep them in the cold lane, I said. Make them choose between losing speed and scalding their own sails. Power line turn their hurry into a hill they climb, carrying themselves. The vigil paused their song and readied long lines, not to capture, but to guide. Prefecture drones pushed to the yard's edge and formed a dotted border, visible and useless without consent. The kitchen stream host told her audience to put on gloves and stand by to pass blankets down a chain. The white-keeled captain stood on his deck without a coat, jaw hard, a man deciding whether to help or pretend it wasn't his problem. He shouted once at a mate, and that was enough to change the day. Jun, I said, notice. He sent it 7 lines, plain, in the ledger and on the band. Do not burn toward galleries. Do not aim exhaust at assembly bays. Do not broadcast demands. Consent to slow. Enter correction lanes. This is stewardship space. Violations will be answered by return equal to the harm intended. Signed by names, not offices. The Black Ledger answered with laughter, a chorus of voices modulated into one, as if individual throats were beneath their vision. They've patterned themselves on a sermon. Kestrel said, "It's ugly code and uglier taste. They'll expect witnesses." The Saint said, "They will expect us to teach without weight." "Teach with weight," I said. "Mirror with mercy. Keep children out of their equations." Powerline, mercy is a weight you choose to bear where others drop it. We took station at the yard's dark shoulder, between a cracked spar and a sleeping girder. Our decoys drifted little dull things, each tuned to ring like a hot engine on the Colt's scopes. Ortega set them chirping in a staggered sequence that counted out prime intervals. If they ignore the primes, she murmured, they'll overshoot on the second pulse. They'll ignore them. Rook said, they're busy hearing their own echo. He was right. The first knife boat kissed a decoy with its targeting radar and dumped a pulse that would have stripped paint, then heard its own transmission return annotated with a correction -3 degrees, -2 seconds. Your plan kills the innocent. They fired anyway. The Saint absorbed the strike by widening a field that looked like a hollow shell of mathematics, then leaned that shell so the energy slid off into empty volume where it flickered out harmlessly, heat bleeding into nothing. The Cult didn't slow. Second mover, Kestrel said, voice even. He's trying to put exhaust into the Vigil's circle. Draw him, I said. Make it expensive. The Saint painted a corridor with lights barely visible, cool as breath on a window. The knife boat took it because arrogance and guidance feel the same at high speed. He dumped heat and met his own wash turned back along the slats. Cooking his gills for a moment, he throttled down with a curse we all heard, then shoved through the pain because sermons don't include exit conditions. Powerline pride will burn its own hand to keep pointing. We lit the correction lanes on the band with a melody the Vigil picked up and sang, low and steady, like counting in a hospital. Children joined. A cutter of white keel moved into position and held its place exactly not to block, but to demonstrate obedience so obvious even a zealot could learn it without admitting he had. Vass, to his credit, spoke only once. This is a lawful return. It would be quoted later in a dozen rooms. Third mover, Kestrel said, he's smarter. Smarter how Ortega asked. He's not swinging at decoys, Kestrel said. He's aiming at you. Our hull shivered as a brush of microwaves licked the bow. I tasted coins. The Saint didn't return force immediately. It turned the knife boat's targeting baseline into a curve that bent back through a fault in their own shield envelope and gave them a ghost echo of their captain's voice from 10 seconds earlier. The echo said, confession belongs in books, not in fire. The captain flinched. We heard it as a crack in his cadence. He's touchable, Rook said. He hears himself. Power line. The right mirror shows you something you cannot unsee. I opened the band to speak to them. Not begging and not daring. Just putting a hand out where everyone could see it. You claim to love ledgers, I said. Our book is open. Your book is closed. If you open yours, we will read it. If you refuse, the lesson will hurt. You cannot account for sin, their chorus said, made of 3 and 5 voices. You can only purge it. Sin isn't a number, I said. Harm is. The Saint made the harm visible. Heat bloom was rendered in strokes of soft gold across the yard map. Every time the cult dumped waste into a lane we'd marked safe. The bloom faded every time they aimed at a gallery. The bloom brightened into a red that read as shame without anyone saying the word. The kitchen stream overlaid the bloom on a pan and told her viewers the dish would scorch if the cook pretended the burner wasn't on. Children giggled. A teenager whispered, "Please, don't be stupid." And that prayer reached me cleaner than any hymn. Powerline, make the invisible costs visible until denial is boring. They pushed. We returned. The dance had steps, impulse, ledger, return. But dances are not always gentle. One knife boat clipped a dead spar and coughed out a spray of bright shards that pinged our hull in little metallic bells. Another overcorrected and scraped a white keel cutter, leaving a wound that would be welded later with curses and beer. Our decks tilted a fraction as Ortega trimmed thrust with one hand and wiped her eyes with the heel of the other. Then the cult changed music. Their chorus broke. A single voice rasped through. "If Ledger is king," he said, "we will pay with blood." He turned his nose toward the vigil's circle and accelerated stupidly. An act not of war, but of broadcasting suffering. The saint's field moved like a hand slamming a book shut an inch from a child's fingers. The knife boat hit the field and stopped hard enough that I felt it in my molars. Not a collision, no. A redirection that left his hull intact and his crew alive and his pride in pieces. We did not consent, the saint said, and the calm in its voice filled the hall with frost. Power line consent is the hinge between force and law. We came off cold gas with a short burn that painted us in blue and drove us across his bow. Rook's jaw muscle jumped once. I saw it in my peripheral and loved him for being scared and present anyway. Ortega popped flares not hot, cold packets of chill that tricked thermal eyes into thinking the world had 3 new moons. The knife boat tried to track and lost us for a measure. Jun spoke softly into the ledger, naming our acts, naming theirs, naming the exact degree of return that would be applied if they continued. Your math is blasphemy. The chorus reassembled, but thinner. It's a map, Jun said. Maps are only blasphemy when you've been telling everyone the earth is flat. They aimed a packet at the Saint Code smeared with scripture, a collar wrapped in lace. The saint did not mirror this time. It simply refused to receive. The packet splashed against math that didn't admit certain shapes. No collar. It said, not to them, to the ledger. Powerline never let a pretty ritual hide a chain. We weren't going to kill them. That was never the lesson. We were going to stop them and make the stopping into a precedent you could point at when the next sharp ship came hot with belief. So we guided. We brought all 3 into a corridor that had been a shadow an hour earlier and now was bright with the path children had drawn on their screens at home. We made them slow so much they had to hear themselves breathe. We made their engines enter a count that matched the hymn. When they complied by accident, the saint opened a page and wrote compliance under duress. Accepted. Further teaching required. Captain, said the single rasping voice. He sounded tired now. You heard us. I heard you, I said. Now hear the yard. The vigil sang again. Not a lullaby, and not a victory chant. Something with a strong spine. The white keel drummed on metal with wrenches. The kitchen clanged a lid against a pot. Administrator Vass spoke a sentence that began, "We hereby," and ended, "under the ledger known to all." The children counted loud and wrong and correct at once, because the point of counting is practice more than perfection. Powerline, the day you can explain to a child, you can defend in a court. They cut drive. All three. The yard exhaled. Frost grew and receded on my faceplate with my breath. My throat tasted like coin and relief. The saint didn't relax its fields. It tucked them away the way you put sharp tools back into their sleeves. Accepted. It said into the ledger. Then, to me alone, costs. Report. I said. 2 minor hull scuffs. Kestrel said. Forward starboard pane is now art. 1 bent handrail. Ortega's left glove heater failed for 9 minutes, and she did not report it because she is stubborn. Ortega snorted. It's fine. I like my fingers crunchy. Don't, I said, and she wiggled them to make me smile. And a loss of long burn margin at 8%. Kestrel finished. Scars are shallow. We'll polish the paint. Power line. Write the bill where everyone can see it, then pay it together. We opened a channel to the cult. Here's your ledger tab. Jun said. It has 3 entries already. You may deposit acts that reduce harm. You may withdraw nothing until you do. You cannot convert us, the rasp said. We aren't clergy, I said. We're stewards. The rasp laughed once, a sound like a man embarrassed by his own poetry. We believed the saint ate sin, he said. We believed offerings made the world cleaner. The saint eats numbers ice, I said, and it returns them as instructions. We will leave, he said, or you will cage us. You will stay, Jun said, until you repair the spar you broke. Then you will leave under escort. Your exit will be logged. Powerline freedom comes faster when you carry the weight you dropped. The vigil assigned 2 boats to hold a light tether across the corridor, not to bind, but to remind. The white keel sent welders. The kitchen host signed off and told everyone to stretch their hands, drink water, and send blankets to the forward gallery. Vass wrote a second sentence without clearing his throat. And if you've ever watched a man rewire himself on camera, you know how brave it looks. We took turns sleeping in narrow slices of time. I lay on a bench in the hall and listened to the saint's arrays shed heat. It sounded like rain on distant tin, soothing and industrial at once. When I woke, the ledger's page was open to a new entry line blank. Waiting. My name sat above it, smaller than I felt and somehow exactly the right size. Civilians came to the threshold and put their hands on the circle without crossing. A girl with a shaved head pressed her palm to the ring and asked if the ship knew jokes. The saint answered one, bad and ancient, about 2 electrons and a bar, then made a note taught by laughter, learned the necessity of new material. A man with scars like a map along his jaw asked if the ship would still be here next winter. The saint said, if the ledger holds, I will. He nodded as if that were enough to carry him through a dozen nights. Powerline hope is a promise backed by receipts. We met again in council, not in a small room, in the gallery where everyone could stand and itch and cough and whisper and still hear the words. Vass read the draft doctrine not like a king, like a clerk proud of neat script. The Anchorage Stewardship Doctrine, he said. Relics that teach by number will be approached by proofs of burden, not claims of force. Ledgers shall be public. Returns shall match harms. No callers. Instruction first. When force is used, it shall be mirrored, not magnified. Precedent applies beyond this yard. Put that in a language a hauler can spit while driving. The kitchen host called. Jun rewrote on the fly. If a thing asks you to be decent, show your work, he said. If someone swings, don't swing harder. Hold their arm and turn them around so they see who they were aiming at. Keep the book open. That's better. The host said, and everyone laughed, including the saint, which laughed by warming the ring for a second like sunlight falling on an old table. Powerline laws that don't fit in a mouth won't live in a day. We took testimony. The boy with the scarf said he wasn't scared when the numbers were singing. His sister said she was always scared, but she liked that adults looked scared and did the work anyway. The White Keel captain admitted on mic that he had lied to his ledger last winter and that he would not again, because the book talked back now. The vigil elder said the wire sang warmer today, and that meant the saint liked our hymn. And verse, to his credit, said perhaps it means we like ourselves. The cult welded under watch. They were competent hands. You can believe wrong and still close a seam perfectly. The world is perverse like that. One of them fainted when his water tube kinked and fell against a brace. Rook caught him by the belt and secured him with 2 clicks and an insult that managed to sound affectionate. When the man woke, he said, "You saved us." And Rook said, "You're heavy." And that was that. Powerline redemption is a verb with torque specs. We were not finished. The yard had decades of rot under a thin coat of habit. The saint had chambers closed to us still. Lessons locked behind acts we hadn't done yet. My shoulders hurt and would hurt tomorrow. Ortega's glove heater ticked twice before it held steady. Kestrel flagged a long maintenance chain that would take a month and 3 more that would take a year. Vass asked if we could afford to keep the ledger public when criminals would read it too. Jun said criminals already read the world. This would teach the world to read them back. In the dark, between shifts, I walked alone to the threshold where the first rune had glowed. The corridor smelled like warm metal and a little like someone had cooked onions nearby. I put my glove where I had the first day and felt the saint touch back no magic, only field and feedback and a presence that had chosen to be here with us. We almost lost it, I said. We almost did the wrong thing because the short path had a badge on it. You did not, the saint said. We could. I said, yes. It said, so you will write the doctrine in large letters and teach it to children who will teach it back to you when you forget. Powerline, the point of a saint is not worship. It's a ruler you hold up to yourself. We had one more lesson to learn before we could claim stewardship and not luck. It came when a barge's anchor failed and the barge swung slow and heavy toward a gallery where 100 people stood shoulder to shoulder. Lines, I said. But the vigil had them already. The white keel had a tug in place before I finished the word. The saint gave the tug a lane and a little field for grip a legal push. Logged and visible, the barge settled, kissed soft, against the rib. The 100 people cheered like they'd seen a miracle. I suppose they had. Then, because the world insists on symmetry, the knife ship captain returned on the band. Not the cult, the prefecture military. Commander Ilian, he said, I have signed your ledger. My superiors have questions. They want to know what happens when the next relic isn't polite. We won't be either, I said. We'll be lawful. That won't satisfy them, he said. It will outlast them, June said. Before I could. Powerline, politeness ends at the door. Law keeps the house standing. The saint offered us a deeper hall. Not larger. Deeper space with fewer lines and more open dark. A classroom that expected us to draw the board ourselves. Lesson, it said. Numbers fail when you forget their units. Doctrine fails when you forget the bodies it applies to. We practiced unit discipline with heat and time. We practiced doctrine discipline with bread and beds. Ortega built a chart that showed exactly which workshops would be cold, which hours, and exactly which blankets would go where. The kitchen host paired the chart with a recipe that required no heat and tasted almost like comfort. The vigil organized a bedroll under the gallery, public and clean. White Keel financed an extra scrubber for that roll and signed the purchase in the ledger so loudly it felt like confession. Powerline ethics is logistics with names. Kestrel, amused at themselves, wrote a small poem in code and hid it in the feed where children would find it. If you can count to 10, you can count to us. A girl decoded it and sent back, we can count to 12. The saint flashed its rune on a dark panel where only she could see, then logged lesson encouragement multiplies. It ended not the work, not the doctrine, only the first hard chapter on a day when the dwarf star felt closer and the books were balanced by measures that looked like life. We stood again in the hall. The ledger page for the day blinked at its edge, waiting for the last act before it sealed and joined the stack like a tile in a courtyard path. Vass read the final lines of the Anchorage Stewardship Doctrine and set his stylus down as if it weighed half his arm. The vigil elder tied the last loop of wire and touched it to the ring and smiled like someone tasting soup and finding it perfect. The White Keel captain signed without flinching. The cult's rasp put his name on their repair entry and left a space for another he didn't fill. The children were loud and then still. The saint lit its sigil in the hall's floor, soft as a lantern behind a curtain. A rays cooled with a sigh. One ledger entry at the bottom of the day's page blinked carefully until we looked, then steadied first precedent relics by ledger, not by collar. I spoke last. Not because I wanted the honor, but because someone had to say a thing and mean it. I kept my words small, below 100, hard enough to hold. We will keep the book open. We will return what we take, count what we break, and make the counting public so repair is a shared skill, not a secret. When force comes disguised as help, we will ask it to sign. When fear comes disguised as urgency, we will make it slow. We will teach the next crew to teach the next, until the habit survives our names. The saint remembers by numbers. We live by our ledger.